The morning of April 6, 1945, arrives with deadly intent. Off the coast of Okinawa in the East China Sea, Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet sits waiting. The sun breaks across the water, but there's no comfort in this dawn. On radar-equipped destroyers, positioned 16 miles from the main battle group, the sailors understand what's coming. They've been briefed. They know the scope of what approaches. In the Combat Information Center aboard USS Lafay, the radar operators watch their screens with absolute focus. The blips aren't coming in dozens. Hundreds of contacts fill the scope. Absolutely hundreds. Below deck, the 5-inch gun crews move with practiced efficiency, loading shells marked with those cryptic VT designations. Each one contains something revolutionary, miniaturized radio transmitters that will forever change how naval battles unfold. The mission ahead is grim. The goal is survival. They're about to face Operation Kikusui No. 1, the first of 10 massive coordinated kamikaze assaults that will test American defenses like nothing before. At 0600 hours, the sky transforms. Through the morning haze comes the sound, that distinctive drone of hundreds of Japanese aircraft engines, wave after wave approaching from the north. It's a sound that will define everything about the Battle of Okinawa. Pilots sit sealed in their cockpits with absolute certainty they won't return home. Leading the assault are the Imperial Japanese Navy's Special Attack Units. Zero fighters slice through the air. Yakusuka D-4 dive bombers follow, laden with 250-kilogram bombs. Behind them come waves of older aircraft, pressed into suicide service because newer planes no longer exist. Mixed among them are the most feared weapons of all. Pilots strapped into rocket-powered flying bombs, carried beneath Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. What unfolds next will reveal the true power of American proximity fuse technology and explain why Japanese kamikaze tactics, initially so devastating, would ultimately crumble against the most sophisticated anti-aircraft system ever deployed. The American VT proximity fuse had arrived in the Pacific Theater after 2 years of brutal combat testing. The program began with a single historic shot. Back in 1940, Section T of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, under the direction of Dr. Merle Tuve, launched a crash development program. This proximity fuse would become one of World War II's 3 most critical secret projects, ranking alongside radar and the atomic bomb itself. The principle behind it was brilliantly elegant. A miniature radio transmitter and receiver sent out continuous radio waves, measuring their return frequency with precision. The moment the Doppler shift indicated proximity to a target, the fuse would detonate the shell automatically. Gunners no longer needed to estimate exact distances or manually set mechanical timers. The shell itself knew when to explode. But achieving this simplicity had demanded staggering technical solutions. The fuse contained approximately 130 electronic components, all miniaturized to fit in a space no larger than a pint milk bottle. Every component had to be manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Tiny glass vacuum tubes, produced by Sylvania, needed to survive forces of 20,000 times gravity during firing. The projectile would reach 2,600 feet per second while spinning at 25,000 revolutions per minute as it traveled through the gun's rifling. Everything had to function perfectly after that violent launch, then operate reliably across temperatures ranging from 100 degrees Fahrenheit down to 50 degrees below zero. By April 1945, American factories had produced over 15 million proximity fuses for naval use. Manufacturing had been distributed across an enormous industrial network. Crosley Corporation alone produced over 5 million fuses, representing nearly a quarter of the total output. RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and countless others participated in the effort. 87 different companies worked across 110 factories, each handling various phases of production. This massive industrial commitment ensured that American forces at Okinawa possessed the most advanced anti-aircraft ammunition ever created. The United States Navy had dramatically increased proximity fuse allocation over 2 years. In 1943, proximity fuses made up just 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition. By 1945, that number had climbed to 75%. This shift reflected a hard-earned recognition that Pacific warfare against suicide attacks demanded revolutionary defensive capabilities. Every destroyer, cruiser, and battleship carried thousands of VT-fused 5-inch shells as their primary defense. Standing in sharp contrast was the Japanese Kamikaze program, born from desperation. After catastrophic defeats in the Marianas and the Philippine Sea, Japan had lost most of its experienced pilots and the majority of its aircraft carriers. The situation had become dire. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commanding the 1st Air Fleet, had proposed the formation of special attack units back in October 1944. He argued that conventional tactics could no longer succeed against the overwhelming American firepower crushing his forces. The Kamikaze represented Japan's answer, transforming inexperienced pilots into human-guided weapons. On paper, the mathematics seemed favorable. Conventional attacks achieved hit rates of only 2% against heavily defended American ships. But early kamikaze attacks during the Philippines campaign had achieved success rates exceeding 34%. A single pilot in a Zero carrying a 250-kilogram bomb could potentially sink or cripple a destroyer. Trading one life and one obsolete aircraft for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in damaged warships. It seemed logical. It seemed like it might work. The kamikaze pilots underwent abbreviated training that emphasized spiritual preparation far more than flying skills. Many had less than 100 hours of flight time, compared to the 500 or more hours their predecessors had possessed before Pearl Harbor. Training focused on basic navigation, ship recognition, and most critically, the final diving approach designed to evade anti-aircraft fire. Before each mission, pilots wrote final letters to their families, participated in ceremonial sake rituals, and received samurai swords or rising sun headbands. Yet no amount of spiritual preparation could overcome what they were about to encounter: a technological revolution. The Oka suicide weapon represented the ultimate expression of the kamikaze concept. American sailors nicknamed it the Baka, meaning fool. This piloted bomb carried a massive 1,200-kilogram warhead, powered by 3 solid-fuel rocket motors. In its terminal dive, it could reach speeds of 575 miles per hour, designed to be unstoppable once released from its carrier. But it possessed a fatal weakness: range. It could barely reach 10 miles, requiring the vulnerable Betty bombers to carry them directly into the teeth of American defenses. Those bombers became death traps the moment they entered the defensive perimeter. The contrast in defensive philosophy was absolute. American ships at Okinawa deployed in concentric rings of protection. Radar-equipped destroyers positioned themselves to provide early warning and absorb the initial assault. Each destroyer carried between 12 and 16 5-inch guns, all capable of firing VT-fused shells, creating overlapping fields of fire that blanketed the sky. The proximity fuse transformed these guns from area denial systems into precision instruments. A 5-inch VT shell possessed a lethal burst radius of 70 feet, compared to just 20 feet for time-fused shells. More importantly, the fuse eliminated the complex calculations required for conventional anti-aircraft fire. Gunners could engage targets the moment detection occurred. They didn't need to wait. They didn't need to calculate. They fired and the fuse did the rest. The morning of April 6, 1945, would test these systems like nothing before. Operation Kikusui No. 1 involved 391 Navy planes and 133 Army planes. Of those, 215 Navy planes and 82 Army planes were kamikazes. A total of 297 suicide aircraft in a single coordinated assault. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton of USS Lafay would later describe the approaching kamikaze waves as resembling a swarm of bees heading toward the only flower in the desert. The imagery captured the moment perfectly. The first wave struck at 0600 hours. Radar operators tracked over 50 aircraft approaching from the north. The picket destroyers opened fire at maximum range, 12,000 yards, launching VT-fused shells into the formations. The proximity fuses proved devastatingly effective. Each shell passing within lethal range detonated automatically, filling the sky with steel fragments. Unlike time-fused shells that required precise range estimation, the VT fuse turned near misses into kills. Within minutes, dozens of Japanese aircraft were plummeting into the sea. Their suicide missions ended miles from any target. But more kept coming. At 0744 hours, USS Lafay came under concentrated attack from 22 aircraft over the course of 80 minutes. The destroyer's gun crews fired 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition, destroying 9 attackers outright. The proximity fuses allowed the guns to engage multiple targets simultaneously, switching rapidly between aircraft without the delays required for traditional fuse setting. When kamikaze pilots attempted their standard tactic of approaching at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, the VT fuses proved equally effective, detonating when shells passed close to the sea surface and creating walls of fragments that shredded low-flying aircraft. Despite this devastating defensive barrage, Lafay was struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs. The ship survived, a testament to both American damage control expertise and the reality that proximity fuses had prevented many more attackers from reaching their targets. The effectiveness of the VT fuse had not emerged by accident. The technology had been secretly tested in combat since January 5, 1943, when USS Helena fired the first proximity-fused shells in action off Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochrane, commanding the after 5-inch battery, shot down a Japanese HD-3A Val dive bomber with the second of 3 salvos. The shells detonated without direct hits. They had simply passed close enough to trigger the fuse and tear the aircraft apart. This single success validated 3 years of intensive development. The fuse contained approximately 130 electronic components, all miniaturized to fit in a space smaller than a pint milk bottle. Every single one had to be manufactured to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Post-battle analysis at Okinawa revealed the mathematical superiority of proximity-fused ammunition. Time-fused 5-inch shells required an average of 1,162 rounds to destroy each kamikaze. VT-fused shells reduced this to 310 rounds per kill, nearly a 4-fold improvement in effectiveness. In optimal conditions, results proved even more dramatic. The destroyer escort USS Abercrombie destroyed a kamikaze with just 2 VT rounds in May 1945. The destroyer USS Morrison, defending against a massive kamikaze attack on May 4, shot down 8 attackers in minutes using proximity-fused ammunition before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The psychological impact of the proximity fuse on Japanese pilots was profound. Pilots who managed to turn back from their suicide missions carried reports of something deeply unsettling. As they approached American warships, the sky itself seemed to explode around them. Black puffs bloomed with terrifying precision, appearing almost exactly where each aircraft would be in the next moment. The explosions kept coming, relentless and accurate, as if the American gunners possessed some supernatural ability to predict flight paths. Japanese military planners had built their kamikaze strategy on a simple calculation. Fast, low passes would minimize time spent in danger, but that calculation collapsed the moment the proximity fuse entered the equation. Shells that would have missed by dozens of feet now detonated with lethal effect, mere yards from their targets. The approach path became a tunnel of precisely timed blasts, each one carefully spaced to catch whatever flew through. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki watched the numbers from his headquarters in Kyushu and grew increasingly alarmed. The success rate was collapsing. During the Philippines campaign, roughly 1 in 3 kamikaze made it through to their targets. By late April 1945, that figure had plummeted to fewer than 1 in 4. Ugaki's intelligence officers could only conclude that the Americans had developed something extraordinary, something that detonated at ranges everyone had thought impossible. His diary entries reflected mounting frustration. The defensive capability of the enemy had grown to remarkable levels, he wrote. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously believed safe. American sailors operating those 5-inch guns with their new ammunition became something approaching heroes within their own task forces, celebrated for their miraculous success. On May 11th, the destroyer USS Hugh W. Hadley faced a coordinated assault. Her gun crews responded with a technique they had perfected, leading each incoming kamikaze with a continuous stream of fire, creating an invisible wall of explosions. 17 confirmed kills came in one engagement, with each gun capable of firing 15 rounds per minute. Every shell carried inside it a small electronic device that thought for itself, searching for targets as it flew. During a single 52-minute period, Hadley's gunners destroyed Kamikaze in rapid succession. The proximity fuses ensured that shells didn't need to be perfectly aimed. Anything passing through the detonation zone would be caught by the deadly fragments spreading in all directions. 3 days earlier, USS Aaron Ward endured an assault of staggering proportions. 40 kamikaze aircraft attacked simultaneously. For 52 minutes, her 5-inch batteries fired without ceasing. 6 attackers were completely destroyed, and 5 others were so badly damaged they crashed into the ocean before reaching the ship. Gunner's mate William Sanders spoke about it later, explaining that without the proximity fuses, the ship would have been lost in those first 10 minutes. The ability to engage multiple threats rapidly, without needing to calculate exact distances, saved lives and ships. Throughout the major operations from April through June 1945, known as Kikusui, the Japanese launched roughly 1,900 aircraft in organized waves. American naval forces met them with proximity-fused shells. The research showed a clear pattern. Ships equipped with this ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive concentrated kamikaze attacks compared to vessels relying on older conventional rounds. What should have been a catastrophic threat became manageable through technology. American forces refined their tactics constantly, discovering that the shells were most effective when fired in overlapping patterns, creating boxes of fragments that nothing could penetrate. Entire task forces coordinated their fire, turning airspace into a deadly maze. Japan responded with tactical variations, dawn attacks, multiple approach angles, mixing conventional and suicide aircraft. None of it mattered. Shells that knew when to explode remained unbeatable. American factories told the real story of this war. By June 1945, production reached 70,000 proximity fuses daily. Over the entire war effort, more than 22 million of these devices rolled off assembly lines, representing an investment exceeding $1 billion in contemporary currency, equivalent to roughly $15 billion in modern money. The Crosley Corporation alone operated 3 shifts, 7 days every week, employing 10,000 workers across multiple facilities. The manufacturing revolution transformed everything. A single fuse cost $732 in 1942. By 1945, that price had fallen to just $18 through mass production. This investment paid for itself many times over. Navy analysis showed proximity fuses prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japan's industrial capacity, devastated by relentless bombing campaigns and resource depletion, could produce nothing comparable. Japanese scientists understood the theoretical principles, and German reports describing Allied special ammunition had even reached Japan through submarine. But understanding wasn't enough. The infrastructure simply didn't exist. Vacuum tube technology alone demanded precision manufacturing far beyond what Japan's war-damaged factories could manage. Japanese radar remained primitive by comparison. Their most advanced naval system, the Type 22, operated at wavelengths that made miniaturization impossible, even if the manufacturing capacity had somehow existed. The technological gap proved decisive. By May 1945, kamikaze pilots received new instructions. Approach at high altitude first, then dive vertically toward targets, hoping to reduce exposure to the deadly anti-aircraft fire. While this changed the tactical approach, it created new vulnerabilities. Ships could maneuver away from vertical dives. High-altitude approaches gave radar operators precious additional seconds to track and coordinate defenses. The adjustment backfired. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commanding amphibious forces at Okinawa, understood this clearly. He wrote to the Chief of Naval Operations that without proximity fuses, the casualty toll from suicide attacks would have been intolerable. Without the VT fuse, our losses from kamikaze would have been unbearable. Admiral Mark Mitchell commanded the fast carrier task forces. His flagship USS Bunker Hill took a devastating kamikaze strike on May 11th, but survived partly because proximity-fused fire destroyed 3 other attackers that would have finished the already wounded carrier. Arleigh Burke, serving as Mitch's chief of staff, reflected on this years later in an interview from 1978. When I became chief of staff to Admiral Mitchell, commanding the fast carriers, all 5-inch ammunition, whether from the larger or smaller guns, was fitted with VT fuses. Those fuses knocked down enemy aircraft by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our losses in ships and personnel among the fast carriers in the final half of the war would have been catastrophically larger. The impact extended deeper than statistics alone. The technology fundamentally shifted the psychological foundation that made kamikaze warfare viable. Japanese doctrine rested on a brutal equation. Pilots would certainly die, but enemy ships would almost certainly be hit. When success rates plummeted below 20% because of proximity-fused defenses, that equation became impossible to justify, even within the framework of suicide tactics. Young pilots, many of them university students conscripted into special attack units, began to grasp that their sacrifice would likely accomplish nothing. Letters discovered after the war showed this growing awareness. Pilots understood their commanders' promises about American defenses had become outdated. Lieutenant Yukio Seki led the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944. Back then, he achieved devastating results against escort carriers during operations in the Gulf of Luzon, when only 25% of anti-aircraft ammunition incorporated proximity fuses. By the time of Okinawa, his successors faced an entirely different world. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nonaka led the Thunder God's Corps, equipped with Oka flying bombs. On March 21, 1945, his entire squadron was obliterated. Not a single Oka reached its launch aircraft. American fighters, guided by radar operators aboard the task force, shot down all 18 Betty bombers before breakthrough became possible. Even had they penetrated the fighter screen, the wall of proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells would have been impenetrable. The proximity fuse represented something beyond superior factory output. It embodied fundamental discoveries in electronics, materials science, and systems integration that Japan simply could not replicate. Miniaturized vacuum tubes manufactured by Sylvania and Raytheon used specially formulated glass that could withstand tremendous shock and vibration. The battery system, activated by the violent acceleration of firing, relied on an electrolyte that stayed stable for months, yet responded instantly when needed. The radio frequency was precisely calibrated to maximize detection range while minimizing interference. Each component represented years of concentrated research supported by unlimited funding and industrial capacity. Japanese anti-aircraft defenses remained stuck in an earlier era. The Type 98 100mm gun, Japan's best heavy anti-aircraft weapon, still relied on mechanical time fuses requiring manual adjustment before every shot. Japanese naval vessels at Okinawa, including the legendary battleship Yamato during her final sortie, carried anti-aircraft ammunition that was technologically equivalent to American ammunition used at Pearl Harbor nearly 4 years earlier. When Yamato faced more than 300 American aircraft on April 7, 1945, her 162 anti-aircraft guns fired thousands of rounds but managed to shoot down fewer than 10 attackers. The Americans lost just 10 aircraft while sinking the world's largest battleship, a stark visual representation of technological superiority. The proximity fuse also enabled entirely new defensive tactics impossible with conventional ammunition. American destroyers developed what they called the VT umbrella technique. Proximity-fused shells were fired in predetermined patterns above ships under attack, detonated at set distances to create a protective dome of flying fragments. Kamikaze aircraft had to fly through this artificial storm. This method proved especially effective against the Oka flying bombs, whose high speed made them nearly impossible to track with conventional fire control systems, but vulnerable to the expanding sphere of metal fragments created by proximity-fused patterns. Throughout the entire Okinawa campaign, from April through June 1945, the United States Navy expended roughly 150,000 proximity-fused 5-inch shells. While this ammunition represented 45% of heavy anti-aircraft ammunition fired, it accounted for the overwhelming majority of confirmed kamikaze kills at longer ranges. Conventional time-fused shells, making up the remaining 55% of ammunition used, proved effective primarily at close range, where accuracy mattered less. The mathematics were undeniable. Proximity fuses were approximately 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition against kamikaze attacks. The human cost reflected this superiority just as dramatically. When destroyers ran out of their precious proximity-fused shells and fell back on traditional time-fused ammunition, the results were devastating. These ships faced dramatically higher casualty rates when attacked afterward. The USS Drexler experienced this brutal reality firsthand. After she exhausted her VT ammunition supply, 2 kamikaze aircraft struck her on May 28. The ship went down in less than 60 seconds. Those same aircraft would almost certainly have been destroyed by proximity-fused fire. 158 of her crew perished that day, more casualties than many destroyers absorbed across entire campaigns, even when they carried adequate supplies of the superior ammunition. Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded the Fifth Fleet and witnessed the kamikaze threat up close. His flagship, the USS Indianapolis, took a suicide plane hit in March. He transferred to the USS New Mexico, only to have that ship struck as well in May. Spruance reflected on his experiences with startling clarity. He had now watched suicide planes crash into his own vessels twice. He had observed 4 additional ships hit nearby. The admiral did not mince words about what he had learned. These suicide planes represent a weapon of terrifying effectiveness, and we cannot afford to dismiss the threat they pose. Yet Spruance also grasped something crucial that would prove decisive. Without the proximity fuse, the kamikaze assault would have been catastrophically worse. He understood that the VT fuse technology had become a lifeline. It was the difference between losses the Navy could endure and losses that would have been unbearable. Military strategists planning Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan itself, took this lesson deeply to heart. The intelligence reports made the stakes starkly clear. Japan had reserved roughly 10,000 aircraft specifically for kamikaze attacks against any invasion fleet. American war planners studied these numbers carefully. They possessed confidence in what proximity fuses could accomplish. Their calculations suggested that defensive requirements could be met with this technology deployed widely. The production schedule told the story of American industrial commitment. Factories planned to manufacture 100,000 VT fuses every single day by September 1945. Advanced versions were already entering production. The Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses featured improved sensitivity and more reliable operation. The invasion fleet would carry over 1 million proximity-fused shells, a level of air defense firepower no military had ever assembled before. This unprecedented defensive umbrella never faced its ultimate test. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before this climactic confrontation could occur. Yet the proximity fuse's influence on how Japan calculated surrender should not be overlooked. After the war, captured Japanese military documents revealed something significant. They acknowledged that successfully defending against an invasion fleet equipped with what they termed electronic shells seemed impossible. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, the chief of the Naval General Staff, later testified about the calculations his navy had made. Japanese strategists had determined that kamikaze attacks against proximity-fused defenses would achieve less than 10% success rates. At such odds, the entire tactic became militarily pointless. The full scope of what proximity-fused development had accomplished became apparent only after victory. 112 companies had been mobilized beyond the main contractors. This created an entire industrial ecosystem devoted to producing the most sophisticated military electronics of its time. The British scientists, who had originally conceived the proximity fuse concept in 1940, watched from across the Atlantic. They had lacked the resources to develop their own concept. They openly acknowledged what American industry had achieved, something they themselves had deemed impossible. The British had concluded that manufacturing vacuum tubes tough enough to survive the violent acceleration of a gun launch, could not be done. American engineers proved this assessment wrong. The effectiveness demonstrated against kamikaze attacks influenced military technology development for decades afterward. The fundamental principle took hold. Smart munitions, weapons capable of making their own decisions, became central to American military doctrine. Modern anti-aircraft missiles still employ proximity fusing principles descended directly from the VT fuse. The close-in weapon system, protecting today's naval vessels, operates using principles perfected during the desperate defense against kamikaze attacks. The technological superiority that had replaced human guidance with electronic intelligence created a pattern that continues shaping military strategy today. Japanese officers who survived the war spoke with lasting astonishment about American proximity fuse technology. Commander Tadashi Nakajima had helped establish the kamikaze program itself. He admitted candidly, "The Americans possessed superior technology, we understood that much. But the proximity fuse exceeded anything we could have imagined. Our pilots reported shells detonating precisely where they flew, as though guided by invisible hands controlling them. This weapon destroyed something deeper than just aircraft. It shattered the fundamental belief underlying the entire special attack philosophy, that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage." Captain Ichiro Gio had been an early advocate for kamikaze tactics. He survived the war and later reflected with hard-won perspective. "The premise underlying our strategy was that willingness to die guaranteed success. The American electronic fuse demonstrated that technology could defeat even the most resolute human sacrifice. It was more than merely a weapon. It was a statement about the nature of modern warfare itself." The contrast between the proximity fuse and kamikaze attacks represented fundamentally opposing philosophies about the value of human life and technology's role in combat. The American choice invested in preserving lives through superior technology. The Japanese approach treated human life as an expendable weapon. The proximity fuse, by making kamikaze attacks survivable for American forces, demolished the cruel logic that sent young Japanese men toward deliberate death. In this respect, the electronic fuse embodied more than technological superiority. It expressed a moral position about how wars should be conducted. The proximity fuse's legacy against kamikaze attacks extends far beyond military history alone. The crash development program that created the VT fuse established a blueprint for subsequent American technical achievements. From the space program to modern computing, universities, private industry, and military requirements had collaborated to produce 22 million sophisticated electronic devices under wartime pressure. This demonstrated American organizational capability that would define the entire post-war era. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, where proximity fuses were perfected, continued as a driving force in military technology innovation. The laboratory later developed guided missiles and satellite navigation systems. Dr. Merle Tuve led the proximity fuse development effort. He later considered what his team had accomplished and expressed its meaning simply and powerfully. "We preserved lives by making weapons more effective." Every kamikaze destroyed by a proximity fuse meant American sailors returned home to their families. That justified every ounce of effort and every dollar spent. His team's success vindicated the American strategy of applying scientific knowledge to military problems. This philosophy would dominate defense strategy throughout the Cold War and beyond. For Japan, the failure of kamikaze tactics against proximity fuse defenses marked the collapse of beliefs about spiritual superiority overcoming material disadvantage. The young pilots who perished in futile attacks against walls of VT fuse explosions became symbols not of noble sacrifice, but of military leadership that had failed to grasp technological reality. Modern Japan's technological emphasis and commitment to innovation can be traced partly to the harsh lessons of 1945. Electronic fuses had defeated human pilots with mechanical precision. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's performance told an unmistakable story. 310 shells were needed per kill with the VT fuse, compared to 1,162 shells with time-fused ammunition. This ratio translated into preserved ships, saved lives, and ultimately strategic victory. Each VT fuse that operated properly meant an American sailor who walked off a ship alive, a vessel that survived to fight again, and undeniable proof that technology could deliver decisive advantage. The confirmed destruction of hundreds of kamikaze aircraft by proximity fuses before reaching their targets prevented thousands of American casualties. Dozens of ships survived that would otherwise have been lost. The billion-dollar investment in electronic warfare proved itself validated. The story reached its climax in the waters near Okinawa. Radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, and sophisticated damage control systems prevailed against deliberate suicide attacks. The kamikaze pilots, courageous young men sacrificed to a hopeless cause, flew into an electronic killing field their commanders had never anticipated. Though their attacks achieved tactical damage that horrified American sailors, they failed to accomplish the strategic objective. They could not make invasion costs unbearable. The proximity fuse had transformed their sacrifice from devastating weapon into manageable threat. Secretary of the Navy James Forstall summarized this contribution with precision. The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device provided to fleet surface ships, our westward advance could not have proceeded so rapidly. The cost in men and ships would have been vastly greater. Military leaders throughout the Pacific Theater shared this assessment. Electronic intelligence had defeated human sacrifice. The final accounting was sobering yet decisive. During the entire Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze attacks sank 36 American ships and damaged 368 others. Terrible as these losses were, they represented survival of the vast majority of attacked vessels, a survival rate impossible without proximity fuses. The 4,907 American sailors killed by kamikaze at Okinawa, while representing the Navy's bloodiest battle, constituted only a fraction of casualties that conventional analysis would have predicted without this technology. Japanese losses proved absolute. Approximately 1,900 aircraft and pilots were expended in organized kamikaze attacks across operations, plus hundreds more in improvised suicide attempts. They achieved tactical results that fell desperately short of strategic requirements. The proximity fuse's victory over kamikaze attacks demonstrated that in modern warfare, technological superiority could overcome advantages in numbers, determination, or willingness to die. American sailors manning 5-inch guns loaded with VT ammunition possessed decisive advantage over Japanese pilots sealed in cockpits for one-way missions. The miniaturized radio transmitter contained in each shell's nose represented industrial capacity, scientific knowledge, and organizational capability that no amount of martial spirit could match. When the electronic fuse met the human pilot in the skies over Okinawa, the outcome was predetermined. It had been decided in factories in Cincinnati, laboratories in Maryland, and through the fundamental American belief that technology could preserve life while achieving victory. The mathematical reality proved inescapable. A proximity fuse weighing less than 5 pounds, containing 130 electronic components, manufactured for $18 by 1945, and functioning for less than 30 seconds, could destroy a kamikaze aircraft with its pilot, representing years of training, tons of aluminum and steel, and most tragically, a human life that could never be replaced. When multiplied across thousands of engagements throughout the Pacific Theater, this equation translated into American victory through technological superiority. This superiority helped determine the war's outcome. The proximity fuse's success against kamikaze attacks validated the entire American approach to 20th century warfare. Investment in technology, faith in industrial production, and belief that superior equipment could overcome fanatical determination proved correct in the most extreme test imaginable. For Japan, the failure of the kamikaze against proximity fuse defenses represented not just military defeat, but invalidation of core beliefs about spirit triumphant over matter. The electronic fuse had defeated the divine wind, proving that in the crucible of modern warfare, advanced technology would triumph over human sacrifice. The Pacific War demonstrated conclusively that naval warfare superiority belonged to those who could destroy aircraft at distance. Nations capable of designing, producing, and deploying superior defensive technology possessed decisive advantages over those relying on human courage alone. The proximity fuse versus kamikaze comparison illustrates this principle at the most fundamental level. American electronic sophistication defeated Japanese human sacrifice. The VT fuse's success at Okinawa established technological superiority as the determining factor in military effectiveness. The contrast between American and Japanese approaches to anti-aircraft defense ultimately reveals a larger story about industrial warfare in the 20th century. Nations capable of marshalling scientific knowledge, manufacturing capability, and organizational expertise to produce superior military technology held insurmountable advantages. The proximity fuse represented the culmination of American strengths: innovative engineering, mass production, and systematic problem-solving applied to military challenges. Its triumph over the kamikaze demonstrated conclusively that in modern war, victory belonged to those who could think, build, and deploy better technology. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's effectiveness, 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition, reducing required rounds per kill by 73%, prevented the loss of countless ships. This differential, multiplied across the vast Pacific theater, helped secure American victory and established technological superiority as the foundation of post-war military doctrine. The electronic fuse had not merely defeated the kamikaze, it had validated the entire American approach to warfare through superior technology, proving definitively that in matters of life and death, quality of equipment could overcome quantity of sacrifice.